Welcome to When Work Works, a new podcast from UKG. Today, we're diving into a topic that really sits at the heart of almost every industry, and that's the frontline workforce. These are the people who keep our businesses running, who interact with our customers, who interact with patients and the communities that we live in every single day. And yet, these folks are often the ones who are most overlooked when it comes to things like strategy and investment and innovation within workforces. Our topic of conversation today is shaping the agile frontline and looking at how organizations can retain frontline talent, also how AI can help to unlock productivity and help in that retention of employees. Also, what it really means to take a frontline first approach for your organization. So what excites me most about today's conversation is the guests that I have joining me, and that is Josh Bersin. His research and insights have really helped thousands of leaders rethink how they support and develop and empower the people closest to their customers. And those people are the frontline workers. So I'm excited to welcome Josh. Let's dive right in. Hi, Josh.
Hey, Julie. How's it going?
It's going great. You know, I open every conversation with a simple question. If you could fill in the blank for me, work works when?
When you enjoy the people you work with.
Yes, because you go into work every day and you're not dreading working with your colleagues. That's awesome. Before we get started, I feel like you need no introduction. However, for our audience, if you could just briefly introduce yourself, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I call myself an analyst, an industry analyst, and I've been working in the HR domain for close to 30 years. Before that, I did a lot of other things in different roles in companies. Do lots and lots of work with corporate HR departments, IT, technology providers, vendors, keeping up on the space, economic data, data on the workforce, data on the economy, hiring trends. And we decided this last year, also working with you guys, that we're going to spend multiple years on frontline work for two reasons. One is 70 to 75% of the American workforce, 80% of the global workforce is in a frontline role. And the second is that the business issues that companies face in the white collar sort of back office world are actually far less complex and far easier to deal with than the frontline. And I think frontline needs more attention. So we're doing a lot of research on this and thrilled to be working with you guys.
Yeah, we feel the same way at UKG. There's a gap there. Even studies that are done on the front line versus, white collar. And I feel like it's so important that this is almost a forgotten group of workers. Would you agree?
It's marginalized in a sense by the press. It's marginalized in some ways by executives, considering this as a high turnover sort of, workforce that's actually, these are the people that are spending the most time in front of patients, customers, products. Their skills are critically important. Their engagement, their pay, their well-being, their work flexibility can have a direct impact on your company's ability to grow, on your company's employment brand, on your company's products quality and the service quality. And when the frontline workforce is happy and engaged and well-trained, it's an indication that the rest of the company is well-run too. So it's not just a replaceable part of the company. It's actually the core in some ways of what most frontline organization companies do. And when you look at 70, 75, 80% of people working in these jobs, there are very few companies that don't have frontline workers. In fact, I think there's probably none.
When you step back and you think about it, right, that is definitely true. Our research found that right behind pay, work schedule is the biggest factor in whether a frontline employee will stay at an organization or leave an organization. So let me ask you, in your view today, with all the changes and all the technology and all of that, what's this flexibility really mean for frontline workers?
It's huge. I mean, it's maybe one of the biggest drivers of turnover is flexibility or lack thereof. I mean, the reason people end up, in many cases, taking hourly work is because they have kids at home, or they have disabilities, or they have parents at home, or they have other restrictions. They can't do, a normal 9 to 5 or 8 to 6, whatever shift it may be. And if you don't accommodate that, you're not going to get the best of people. You're going to lose people. and you're not going to attract people that have those kinds of lives.
Even if we think back to the pandemic, right? I mean, so many people were able to have that flexibility, if you will, but then there were so many frontline workers that were not able to have any of that flexibility. At this point, when it comes to employee expectations and what employees are looking for, it's no longer a nice to have. Some sort of flexibility is a have to have. I think we have to stop thinking of flexibility as just being able to work from home.
This is the way the world works now. If you don't have a highly flexible, highly dynamic AI-powered scheduling system like what you guys have, then your company's going to fall behind. I mean, I think every company needs this kind of a system.
I tend to agree, but I guess I'm a little biased, right? But let me ask you this. Do organizations sometimes overcomplicate these things?
I think it's not as complicated as it may sound. I mean, it's a cultural thing more than anything else. Another example, a restaurant chain in Canada, they had in-store dining and drive-through.
Okay.
And the staff was running back and forth between the drive-through window and the orders that were going through the drive-through and then taking care of the tables. There was a bit of chaos during COVID when more people were driving through and fewer people were sitting in the store, of course. So one of the store managers said, "We're not going to do it this way anymore. We're going to have two teams." And corporate found out that there were a couple of stores that were having much, much higher overall revenue and sort of metrics than the others. And they interviewed the guy running them, and he told them what he had done. And they said, "Wow, I don't know why we never thought about that. Let's tell everybody else to do it that way."
Yeah, those who aren't in the front line or who aren't doing those jobs. We can't assume that we understand what the experience is like or even what the needs are without that ability to listen. So
There's a wonderful book called The Good Jobs Book. It's a few years old. It was written by an MIT professor, but I never forgot it. And she did a lot of research on retailers. She looked at Costco versus Target versus other, more low-price retailers. And she found that the retailers that were most profitable had higher staffing levels per dollar of revenue. In other words, they were overstaffed. And she said, well, this is very counterintuitive because in retail, the staff is part of the cost of goods. So what she found is that when you overstaff, people have more time to reorganize and optimize the retail stores, clean the floors, talk to customers, help them find things, etc. So there's a sort of a counterintuitive model that, is the labor cost in the front line a cost or is it an investment?
when we think about a frontline workplace or a frontline worker, and we're talking about agility, right? And an agile frontline workforce, how would you describe that to a leader maybe who's just starting to think about agility when it comes to a frontline workforce?
Every industry is a little bit different, but regardless of the industry, the way most businesses work is there's a bunch of people building a product or a service or a retail experience, for customers, and they're sort of working a little bit behind the scenes. And then there's the people in the front line that are dealing with the consumers, the customers, the patients, the manufacturing lines, whatever is going on, in the particular industry. As the company changes or the market changes, things happen. The product's too expensive, nobody wants to buy it. We have a supply chain issue, we have shortages. We have a flawed part of the product or a flawed part of the system. We're creating errors or creating problems for customers. All of that manifests itself on the front line. So if the frontline workers and their managers don't sense some agency and some flexibility and some freedom and some agility, they can't deal with the problems. And they're going to say, well, I'm sorry, I can't do anything about it. That's corporate's problem. And then the customer or the patient or the person coming into the store is like, why am I doing business with you guys? And you've damaged a relationship that might be damaged forever in that person's mind. So if we don't build agility into the frontline workforce, we're not going to be a good company. Then there's the issue of the fact that frontline workers are just like everybody else. They have kids, they get sick, they get tired, or there's something going on, and they want flexibility to move around and change their work experience. A lot of studies have been done that the biggest factor in retention is workplace flexibility. I mean, I know hospitals that are so desperate for staff that they've created in-place childcare for nurses to bring their kids to work so that they'll show up. whether you think of agility from the business standpoint or agility from the standpoint of the workers themselves, it's a huge part of this experience that we have to design into the system.
Yeah, and that's a really good example when you say, you look at it from the business standpoint and then you look at it from the worker standpoint. It's finding that balance that's going to work for both. And oftentimes that's difficult for organizations to do. You have folks who have been there 20, 30, 40 years and they say, well, this is the way it's always done. And I had to kind of earn my role and I had to work when I was sick and all of this. And we're looking at employee experience today and how employee expectations have changed. They've also changed for the frontline worker.
Just tell you a funny story. I was just on the phone with a large chicken producer, and we were talking about the very high turnover rates they have. And the reason they have high turnover is because they're very difficult jobs. And they said, we've started a process of physical fitness for workers to help them become more physically fit to do these jobs. Now, part of that is a selection problem of getting people who actually can do the jobs and want to do them. Part of that is redesigning the workplace itself so it's easier to work there. But they're making accommodations and improvements to try to improve the experience. One of the reasons, Julie, that I think maybe companies don't provide as much strategic investment in frontline is because the wages are lower. But that's actually a very misleading way to think about it. Just because the wages are lower, the actual return on investment might be higher. Because, you probably have more people in frontline by head count, and their impact on the actual customer experience is much, much higher. So don't let the fact that there are low wage or lower hourly workers take away your focus on the strategic nature of the work. And a lot of the flexibility in work experience comes down to managers too. If you're in a retail environment, in a store, in a manufacturing plant, in a hospital, or whatever it may be, usually the HR person isn't there. Maybe they're not even in the same city as you are. So a lot of the issues are going to come down to the manager. And the manager may be a supervisor who got promoted into management because they were good at doing whatever the frontline work is. Investing and developing and giving leaders the right tools and mindset to take care of frontline workers is a huge part of this.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I did a live webinar yesterday and I had that same statement. Somebody asked a question about managers and I said, can we please stop promoting people to managers because they're good in their individual contributor job without giving them the training that they need in order to start to manage people, right? Do you find that organizations sometimes fall short there?
Yeah, all the time. I've been working on this for years. The way I've sort of framed it is that becoming a leader is not a new job, it's a new career. Now, all of a sudden, your expertise is useful, but your ability to help other people develop expertise is more useful. And you have to change your mindset about how you're going to get things done versus being an individual contributor. A lot of companies have good leadership frameworks. They role model leaders, they have assessments of leaders, but a lot of companies don't. A lot of companies, find the person that's producing the most gets promoted, and then all of a sudden you lose the high producer and you have a leader that's not ready. So, this happens all the time. And I think sometimes it comes down to reward systems. If you're paying the leaders significantly more than the frontline workers, well, you're basically sending a message. If you're not moving into management and leadership, you're not going to have a career here. I don't know if that's the right solution for your organization. It may be for a nurse or a very skilled professional, fine. They don't want to be managers. They want to do what they like to do. But if you're in retail or less high value producing role, maybe being management should be a normal rotation. You get to think about that in an organization. It makes a big, big difference in how the organization works.
That lends itself to organizations and upper levels at organizations having to be strategic and also think about things like long-term planning and all of that. And there's so much to unpack here, but kind of bringing it back to the retention. And I want to talk a little bit about your research. Your research showed that in some frontline industries, like restaurants, there's turnover rates as high as 150%. All of that sort of goes together, right? I mean, you have a bad manager, you're going to have people that leave, you have poor training if people don't see a path to growth. That level of churn for a business day to day financially has to put a huge burden on a business, yes?
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive drain on the productivity, the profitability, and the customer experience of your business. Because if you have high turnover, you're wasting a lot of money on training, on hiring. The customers are dealing with employees or workers who are not necessarily skilled because they haven't been there very long, and the culture is suffering as a result. Retention is very complex.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with the job. Is it designed in a way that it's reasonably trainable to get somebody to do this job, or is it an impossible job that's just going to be really, really hard for people to manage? Number two, are we selecting people that are going to be a good fit for this? A huge part of retention is the selection and hiring process of knowing who is likely to succeed and thrive and enjoy this kind of work. Then there's the training, then there's the onboarding, then there's the benefits, then there's the flexibility, then there's the work experience, then there's the opportunity to grow, then there's the safety, and then there's the issue of management. If you're in an environment where turnover is high or higher than you think it should be based on other companies, there's a lot of things to look at. And the more you think about it systemically, the more likely you are to find leverage points to improve it. It's not as simple as giving people more money because, that may not always be the issue. People are willing to accommodate the imperfections in your company and the imperfections in their management experience and the imperfections in the store or the location if they feel the company cares about them.
Imagine
It actually goes a long ways to listen to people and do things to help them and pay attention to the problems they're bringing up. The interesting thing that I also think is so strategic about frontline workers, they usually know all the problems the company has. They know what's wrong with the product. They know why people aren't buying it. They're living it every day. So the more you listen to them, the smarter you're going to be at improving your company on a regular basis. There are no perfect companies. None. So you're always learning. And the more you listen to and sympathize with frontline workers, the better company you're going to be.
I love that listening piece. And I think the other thing that organizations sometimes miss is that there are so many different ways to listen to employees, different ways to get that feedback. I think the first one is survey design, when we're actually asking questions that are meaningful and that are relevant to what people are living every day to understand. If we're going to give a survey, if we're going to ask questions, let's get some meaningful feedback. I find that's a miss sometimes.
Surveys are not going away yet, but they're actually dying off. So, for annual studies, for pay, feedback on pay and benefits, things are great. The second part of listening is suggestions, anecdotes, complaints. We call it employee empowerment, where the employees can talk to their manager and the manager can do something about what they're saying, as opposed to the manager saying, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I have no control over that. Creating what we call employee activation, where an employee at any level can bring up an issue and the manager can say, you know what? I agree with you. That's a really good issue. Let's figure out how to fix it. That's just as important as filling out a survey. So I think the more listening, the better. I mean, Kathy, one of our analysts, always makes this joke about when she worked at Kaiser Permanente. They were always trying to figure out what they could do to make nurses more productive because there were such a shortage of clinical professionals. What the nurses kept saying was, we're not complaining about our pay or our schedules. I mean, that's all fine. You guys got to rearrange the actual patient experience. There's a cabinet that's in the way of all the equipment we're bringing into these hospital rooms. So they did some physical rearrangement of the hospitals to help them. I'm not sure that would have come out in a survey. A lot of these, small things about benefits and pay and flexibility and so forth basically boil up to trust.
Welcome to Strategy Stop. This is where we take a moment to really share what this conversation means for CEOs and CHROs listening in. When I think about some key takeaways from the conversation with Josh Bersin, frontline workers themselves, they are really the strategic core of most organizations. And when we think about attracting frontline workers and retaining frontline workers, oftentimes organizations have a retention issue, but retention itself is not necessarily a pay problem. Retention is a system problem. And employee experience and customer experience, those two things really do go hand in hand. So when our frontline workers, the employees, are having that good experience, when providing them that good experience, then our customers and our ROI is immediately better. So what's one way that we can do that for people? In a world where flexibility is important, I think it's the single biggest lever for frontline retention. And agility has to exist at all areas of the organization, including the frontline. We have to have people in the right places at the right time in order to make sure that business continuity is realized and that people are able to live their lives and work in the way that works for them. UKG's recent AI in the Frontline Workforce report, we found that about 4 in 10 frontline employees say they're currently using AI in their roles. And that's increased from 2024 at about 31%. So we're at about 38% now. In what ways are you seeing AI deployed on the front line, and what opportunities do you see organizations might be missing utilizing AI with the frontline workers?
One is shift management and finding a new shift and dealing with your scheduling. The second is just the general employee experience or employee inquiries, asking questions about your pay, asking questions about your taxes, reallocating your benefits, filing for a time off, filing for a vacation, understanding the safety policy, understanding the policy for, whatever the system may be. You don't want to call HR every time you need help with this stuff, even though HR people are great. We love them. It would be nice if you could just go on your phone and just ask a question. And the reason those systems, all those portals have been hard to build over the years is all of these policies are very complex and they're constantly changing. And depending on what city you're in or what country, they might be different. I mean, AI is just miraculous at making this easier for people. I think number one is giving people a really, really good tool for scheduling and shift management. And number two is giving them an amazing, easy to use employee experience to find information and answer questions. And that's going to be a massive industry that's going to grow and grow and grow with AI.
I want to kind of get back a little bit to the conversation about managers and employees and the frontline worker. Do you think that AI and AI tools can help to shape or reshape a relationship between the frontline worker, managers, and the organization?
Well, I mean, there's a vision out there that maybe the AI will be like a manager. It'll be a coach. It'll help you, kind of better manage your own time and give you things to do and give you feedback and develop you. And that's all happening little by little. But the reason we have managers is not going away. Managers are there for support, for alignment, for discussion of issues, for guidance, for feedback, for coaching, etc. AI doesn't do all that stuff. And so I think AI will provide a lot of value in training and knowledge, as I talked about earlier. It'll help with recruiting. It'll help with scheduling. And it'll help managers get better information too, because nothing's worse than going to your manager and asking them a question and they say, well, I don't know. I'll figure it out and maybe get back to you. And then they never have time to solve the issue. So anything that helps individuals helps managers. I don't really buy a lot of these theories that we're going to have fewer and fewer managers. Let's suppose you have a 5-to-1 or 10-to-1 ratio between employees and managers in a given situation, and all of the employees now have access to AI to do more work and to get more information and to grow themselves faster into their career. Well, you've got super workers. They're still going to need managers. So I don't think the management role is going to disappear. I think managers are going to have to be very comfortable with AI. They're going to have to know how the technology works so they can teach people how to use it and take advantage of it themselves, and also facilitate creative ideas on how to use AI in different roles. So that's what we call the super manager, but I don't quite understand why people suddenly think managers are going to go away.
Yeah, I agree. You're always going to have a human in the equation. One of the questions that I hear a lot after my speeches and all of that is they'll say, okay, Julie, all that's well and good. How do we start? What do we do in order to get our frontline workforce or get our workforce in general sort of on board with either a frontline approach or an AI first approach? How do you prioritize? Do you have any wisdom for us there?
I think there's two parallel paths. One is figure out through your own research or through talking to people, what are the top 5 to 10 issues that you're currently facing that need improvement? And that may be relative to something new that's going on in your company, something going on in the marketplace, something going on in the workforce, whatever. And then in a parallel path, what is our technology stack and our vendor relationships that we can rely on to solve those problems? Even though there's a lot of technology in the market, Every provider is a little bit different in whether they fit your needs, whether they care about you as a customer, whether you're the right size customer for them. So what you don't want to do, in my personal opinion, is just look at all these whiz-bang demos and say, wow, we want all of that. Maybe some of those things are great ideas that you won't really need right now, but make sure your priorities are clear when you're out there looking at AI. AI is changing really, really fast. And I think if you find a really high quality, solution-oriented vendor like you guys to work with, they're going to offer you new solutions every 6 months or a year that are going to be groundbreakingly better than they were before. So it's not like you have to make one decision and it's over. To some degree, you're picking a small number of partners to help you with this journey and share with them what the top 5 issues are in your company and see how quickly they respond and whether they have case studies and examples and understanding of solutions. And you'll be fine.
Yeah, the proof point is so important. I always tell folks, when you're looking at a software vendor and you have a specific problem that you're trying to solve for, have them show you that they can solve that specific problem and don't just let them say that they can. I feel like we could talk about this topic for hours, but to kind of sum it up, if leaders in frontline heavy organizations, if they were to take away one or two key lessons, if you will, from today's conversation, what would you say that they were?
I think frontline work, as we've defined it, and you can read the white paper we've written, that describes sort of what we're talking about here, is one of maybe your most strategic opportunities to grow and improve your company, regardless of the industry you're in. As I said before, it's job design, it's selection, it's hiring, it's management, it's training, it's support, it's flexibility, it's scheduling, it's pay, it's rewards, it's employee experience, all that stuff. If you don't have a team of people focused on that as a strategic part of growing your company, then you're not doing the right thing. Now, you don't need 100 people, but this is not, looking at turnover and just, cranking the numbers up to try to reduce the turnover by a few points. This is thinking holistically about what's going on. For example, one of the clients we're working with is a very, very large semiconductor company, and they're about to open a whole bunch of new plants in the Southeast. They are deathly afraid of how they're going to hire people. This is 2 or 3 years away before they're going to have to do the hiring. They're already planning out what are the skills we're going to need, what are the jobs we're going to create, how are we going to find these people, what kind of shift management are we going to take, what kind of pay are we going to have to pay them. I think retailers should think that way. I think healthcare providers should think that way. I think distribution, entertainment companies, transportation companies. Are you giving it the strategic value in your list of priorities from corporate that you could? Because a small improvement in frontline has a massive improvement in revenue and customer experience. So it is one of the most high leverage parts of your job in HR.
That organization that you're working with is thinking ahead, and it's almost like, okay, let's control the controllables. I think step one is having the data and the foresight to actually get there, right? To understand what it is that you're going to need a month, 2 months, 3 months, 3 years down the line. And that involves having a good technology. Thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate your time and sharing your insights on the frontline workforce with us.
Thank you, Julie. It's great to work with you guys.
Thank you. What an awesome conversation. Josh reminded us that the frontline, it's not just a workforce segment, it's the foundation of every customer experience and every business outcome for an organization. A couple of big takeaways: agility, retention, flexibility, AI, all of those things matter. But they only work when organizations start with a frontline first mindset. So when leaders invest in their people, when they create space for real flexibility and use technology to help reduce friction for frontline workers, the entire organization is going to see the benefits from that. At the end of the day, frontline employees really just want what we all want, and that's to feel supported, to feel valued, to be set up to succeed, and also to be listened to. And the companies that understand that, those are going to be the ones that get ahead and thrive. So thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a rating and review.